This is real.
Years ago, we had some serious drought around here, and so we all got together and did a ceremony rain dance, and it rained the next day, and we never had any problems ever again.
Really, yeah. Sometimes the naked women are good for that. And, yeah.
And we were pushing for that.
Yes. Go. Well, yes, you know, the classic model of the womb is a folded surface on which the egg can take root. And obviously now we know that the perfection of folded surface that makes a cell membrane smart is fractality, Bruce Lipton. And so the womb the same way. The story we were, well, you know, we've had this rather delightful argument for years about why an egg is more fractal than a seed. But in terms of biophysics, it seems that your mother's egg was alive and whole inside her mother's mother. And that's called fractal, which is not at all true of seeds, actually the sperm. And so you have this increased fractality, which is more leverage on the grid, which actually means that you're more embedded in the grid. It also means that men can depart from fractality further, which means they can experience more separateness, but at more risk to their own immortality. That's one way I'd interpret that. But one level of that is called Abraxas point. No, there's another name. Where the women, it's even more important for the women than the men to return to their place of birth, because you get more leverage on the grid due to the fractal sequence of folding in your DNA is more fractal to the land there. So embedding is greater, more leverage on the dreaming, etc. And just to sort of understand that as poetry, imagine a queen bee following a worker bee. The worker bee says, you know, turn left at the sun and make 3 right turns, and there's the nectar. And so the queen bee follows the worker bee in that dance and does that 1 billion times, and every time she changes angle to the sun, her DNA braids. And so eventually, after 1 billion dances, the queen bee has a fractal map of the magnetic lines of the land in her DNA. And that's called the immune system of the hive. And so if you kill the queen prematurely, you know, you lose the holy grail, the whole story. Or if you move the hive, something commercial beekeepers don't understand, is that fractal relationship with the land magnetically in the DNA fold sequencing. And so this is called the dream spell. It's why the Aboriginal mother doesn't move, actually. She stays in the same land. Also, when the Aboriginal mother first feels a baby in the womb, she runs and gets the shaman, and they both draw a map of the magnetism of the land right there where the baby first jumped or leapt in the womb. And that magnetic map of that land on that stone becomes the title deed given to that child, the land over which that child is responsible for dreaming to hold that together. And the dream spell is making the centripetal force that's holding the land together. And we also realize, if you sort of look at the physics of profound remothering, John Diamond rebirthing, where they use placental extract, belly of the surrogate mother, and underwater you get maximum compression to rebirth, to remember the moment of birth, which Joseph Chilton Peirce well described as the bond of power in the title of his book by that title. But if you look at what the geometry of that bond of power called the birth squeeze is about, we talked about this the other day, that if you made a map of the change in pressure over time in the perfect birth canal, you couldn't get a better squeeze. It's a logo for tomato juicers. Is that you made a map of the centric waveform for love, in the physics of love in the music literature. The change in pressure over time of the touch that says I love you reaches max pressure at golden mean ratio into the duration of the event of that squeeze. And so that creates a stricture geometry, which translates vorticity, and you feel the lightning, the spin in your DNA. So you ask your experimental Huggy, did you feel a tingle in your DNA? And then you know if you administered your love hug with the proper squeezing ratios. But this obviously, some of these jokes are getting a little old. We've done this too many times. Sorry about that. But you see what actual birthing can do. So now you understand the physics that if Caesar didn't have a birth canal, the cesarean section, and he didn't, he couldn't bond with his mother, and he couldn't bond with the land, and he couldn't bond with the Druids, and he killed them. And so how do you restore that phase-locked connection, fractality, which is where the star's memory comes in at the moment of birth, the moment of maximum squeeze, is the profound remothering. And you can also understand why, if you give birth to a baby underwater, and the rate of decompression of the skull is made more gentle, critical moment, the rate of decompression of the skull bones. If you make that curve contiguous, very relaxed, birth underwater, so the skull bones don't go, bad news. The skull bones want to go, because the skull bones are dodecahedron, a non-destructive decompression. So if the rate of decompression is also fractal, you bring memory of stars through birth. Yeah, the place of the stars is stored at the moment of the birth of every bond. Because the power spectrum of the electric field, all bonding is phase locking, contains the It's a map of the stars in this way that you can measure the star positions with a 25-cent capacitor. Hodowanic and Ramsey. It's basically the electric field power spectrum reveals the angle to every major star. Yes, yes, exactly. Yes. Yes, the film, I think, was Caril Daniels' one was called Water Baby, and is it Tchaikovsky? Yes, no, and they also, these babies then they learn to swim at age 6 months, and their average intelligence is like double, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this all has to do with this ability to bring memory contiguously through and this development. So underwater birthing is a fabulous thing, actually. True. So it's after 1 here. So we kind of said we'd take, let's say we get back together at 20 after 2, an hour and 15 minutes. So 20 after 2, hour and 15 minutes, something like that. And then we're going to do more relaxed conversation about anything you want to talk about. Then we're going to do our DNA science story, then our DNA history story, and then our ritual. Yeah? Does anybody have suggestions about lunch options here?